Hi, I'm Saida Garrett, co-writer of Michael Jackson's Man in the Mirror, and you're listening to Rainbow Country with Mr. Mark Tara.
The views and opinions expressed on the following program are those of the persons appearing on the program.
Today on Rainbow Country, a queer artist spotlight featuring American indie artist Eric Terino and Canadian bossa nova artist Bruno Capinan. All that and more lies ahead on episode 331, so stay tuned for Gay Talk Radio right here on Rainbow Country.
Hi, this is Carol Pope.
Hi, I'm Garrett Conley, author of Boy Erased, a memoir.
Hi, I'm Lorraine Segato.
Hi, I'm Gord Depp with the Spoons. You're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
Well, hello and welcome to a brand new journey through Rainbow Country. As I like to call it, a little gay radio show working to give voice to the LGBT community and beyond. And as always, I am your tour guide through Rainbow Country. I'm producer and host, Mark Tara. By the way, Rainbow Country originates from CIUT-FM in Toronto and now proudly in syndication on 12 outlets across Canada, from coast to coast to coast. The Yukon, British Columbia, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, the east coast of Canada in Newfoundland, Ontario, even down to Buffalo, New York, and online. Well, thanks to you tuning in, streaming, downloading, but ultimately listening. Together, we continue to build Rainbow Country into a nationally syndicated gay radio show, a #1 LGBT podcast on Podomatic.com's Gay and Lesbian chart, as well as being recognized as Canada's #2 LGBT podcast on Feedspot.com. So today, a queer artist spotlight featuring two artists who talk about new music, being part of the LGBT community, and more. American indie artist Eric Terino talks about his latest album, Innovations of Grave Perversity. Plus, Canadian bossa nova artist Bruno Capinan joins me to talk about their latest release, Rara. Plus, in hour 2, music from LGBT artists, independent artists, voices that we've come to know and love in classic disco, classic 80s, classic house, and on this episode I'm featuring some Crystal Waters, as well as music from Eric Terino and Bruno Capinan. All that lies ahead as we start Journey 331 through Rainbow Country. And our first stop is what I like to call the Rainbow Country School for Canadian Gay History. And on today's session, from activist, author, and historian Tim McCaskill, the early days of the AIDS epidemic.
At first, we didn't believe it. I was doing the international news for the Body Politic when I read a report in an American paper about a strange new cancer that was apparently affecting gay men. More sensationalized media homophobia, I thought. Didn't turn out that way. Some Body Politic collective members were back and forth to New York and soon reported that something serious was indeed going on. Guys who had seemed quite healthy months before were suddenly dying. Nobody knew what was happening, so everybody got to project their own prejudices on the blank slate of AIDS. If you were an environmentalist, it was obviously big city pollution. If you didn't like poppers, it was caused by poppers. If you didn't like sex, drugs, and rock and roll, it was too much sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Maybe it was all that sperm up our bums. If you were a fundamentalist Christian, it was obviously God's punishment, the wages of sin is death, and so on and so on. What we did know was that somehow it was connected to sex. That was bad news for those of us in the business of sexual liberation. We saw a whole community based on sexual networks potentially falling apart. We feared everything we'd built up over a decade was about to be destroyed, not to mention that we were all going to die. New York and San Francisco were already in a panic. Larry Kramer was screaming that we were fucking ourselves to death. Baths and sex clubs across the U.S. were being closed down. There were no effective medicines. If you had it, it was just a matter of time before you died. The government was doing fuck all, so we had to figure this out for ourselves. In 1983, the community came together to form the AIDS Committee of Toronto and began to organize care teams and support groups. Then HIV was identified. For the first time, we knew this was a blood-borne virus that could be sexually transmitted. ACT took on prevention campaigns. What squared the circle of sexual liberation versus a deadly sexually transmitted disease was safe sex. Condoms came to our rescue. We could still have sex, just had to use a rubber. AIDS in Toronto was born in the shadow of the bath raids, remember? We had just moved heaven and earth to defend these places. We weren't about to let them close down now. So while baths and clubs were being shuttered south of the border, ACT demanded there be no such closures in Toronto. Baths here remained open and became sites of outreach and education, and they're still open today. This is Tim McCaskill, a gay liberation dinosaur from another planet and author of Queer Progress.
Hi, I'm Justin Ling, author of Missing from the Village. You're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
Up next, Canadian queer bossa nova artist, Bruno Capinan.
Sou sul-americano, eu sou de São Salvador. A Bahia já me deu, que ninguém pode tirar. Sul-americano, sou filho de Oxalá. Viajei pra levantar meu império, minha voz. Sul-americano, preto gay ocidental. Da carne de carnaval, no meu sangue a dor dos meus. Sul-americano, do país do bacanal. De Zumbi a João, Marielle, Elza, Gil. Areia, oh, mareo. Areia, oh, mareo. Areia, oh, areia, oh, mareo. Sul-americano, Tapajós, Tupinambá.
Bruno Capinan, hi, how are you?
I'm great, how are you?
I am well. I have to say thank you for being here, to have your voice, your story be heard by the LGBT community and beyond. Bruno Capinan. Am I saying your last name correctly? Let's start there.
Yeah, it's perfect. You're saying it the way you should say it.
Yes, yes.
And thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Oh, you're more than welcome. You are more than welcome. I'm glad that you're here, especially to talk about your latest record, your latest album, Rara? Is that how you say it?
In Portuguese would be Tarahara, because the R, it has an H sound.
Oh.
But in English would be Tarahara. So it's just the, like a repetition of the two last syllables of Tara.
So Tarahara.
Yes.
Okay, understood. Talk to me, let's start there. Let's start with this title. Is there a meaning behind Tarahara?
Yes, the meaning behind the title is that it's inspired by my nickname as a child. When I was a child, my father gave me the nickname of Buddha, which is the god of Buddhism. And when I found out that Tara is the female counterpart of it. That's when I realized this title made sense to me as a non-binary person. And at the time, as someone trying to understand the lyrics on this album and how I'm moving towards something that is more non-binary than ever. So it just made sense to me to be called Rara. And Rara, or Rara, in Portuguese means rare. So Tara also means desire. So it's a rare desire. Mm-hmm. So there's two meanings in there, two ways that you can look at it.
How would you describe the sound of your music? What genre would you place yourself in?
Yeah, I would say Brazilian-ish pop. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that makes sense, but I also like to say it's queer bossa nova.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yes, queer bossa nova. Hello, here we come. And this album, Tarahara,
yeah.
Is this indicative of your music, the sound of this new record?
It is. I would say because it's also related to who I am as a person. Mm-hmm. You know, moving towards, as I said before, being non-binary is also something that I could say influences me on my music making as well, how I approach music. I would say that my music is also an evolution, you know, like everything else. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it makes completely sense for me to call myself or my music queer bossa nova, mm-hmm. In a way, you know. I don't know if it makes sense to you.
It makes perfect sense. You've been doing music for a while. You're, 10 years into your career. And on this new record, my understanding is 90% of the musicians on this record are BIPOC individuals, people from the LGBT community. Talk to me about how you went about picking the musicians that would be on this record of yours.
I would say I had to do the work, you know, mm-hmm. of going around looking to find those musicians. It wasn't easy, but I'd like to say that because most of my career has been about who I am, I decided that I shouldn't just talk the talk, but I had to walk the walk. Mm-hmm. You know?
So I went around looking. To surround yourself with people like yourself.
Not just like myself, but also the people that I value as mm-hmm. part of my community, and also mm-hmm. people that I value as a reflection of how I want society to mm-hmm. be. You know what I mean?
And these musicians are from where?
Most of them from here, from Toronto, but okay. It's also, there are some musicians from Brazil, the majority of them from here, but not born in Toronto. Mm-hmm. So they're like immigrants to Canada as well. So we have kind of similar stories too. I don't know if that makes sense to you. Like we have like that common, not just the story of being BIPOC, but also some of them queer and some of them immigrants to Canada mm-hmm. as well.
And the response to this new record, how are you happy with how it turned out and the response that it's getting?
Yes, I'm very happy how it's being received. I would say it's been very positive in Canada. It's been very positive in Brazil, in France. So it's been getting a lot of press, which makes me very happy. but I also get messages from people saying they love the record, and that means more to me, to get messages that are more personal as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Your music is heard in a number of countries like Canada, the United States, Argentina, in Brazil, in Japan. How did you get turned on to music in the first place?
I would say probably when I was 1 year old. But not that I remember, but what my family would tell me. My mom, she told me that when I was 1, I used to sing in front of the TV and dance in front of the TV to whatever was on the TV. And then for what I remember, when I was 5, I started to explore like my artistry, I would say. That I have like a recollection of it. But as a songwriter, as a singer-songwriter, I would say when I was 12, that's when I first started writing my songs. And then I knew that's what I wanted to do. But I started acting when I was 11, I would say. Like around 11 years old. And then from there, that's how I discovered that my thing was being on stage, And then the writing process just, for me, was always very natural, or like a natural way of expressing myself.
Your audiences, a Bruno Capinan audience, whether it's in Japan, in Canada, in the States, in Argentina, in Brazil, are there differences, or is there a commonality amongst your audiences, would you say?
There is a difference that it's more related to how people perceive music as an art form. Mm-hmm. So in Japan, they're very respectful. They're very quiet, like all the way through. So they watch the concert very, very quiet. And then they clap at the end. But here, people sometimes like to expect you to do, like to play a certain music style for them to dance and have fun. So, yeah, I would say it's different for sure.
You were born in Brazil. You now live in Canada. My understanding is when you were growing up in Brazil, you were bullied, you faced discrimination. Mm-hmm. Back in Brazil, why do you think that was happening to you? Was that because of your ethnicity, because of your sexuality, how you were expressing yourself gender-wise? Why do you think that was happening to you back in Brazil?
Brazil, it's like if you look it up, Brazil is one of the I think it's like the number 1 country for trans community, as an example, and it's also it's the number 1 for trans porn. So people are searching for that on porn sites. Mm. But it's also the number 1 for killings. Growing up,
it's also the number 1 for what? For killings?
Yeah, of trans people.
Okay. Of trans individuals. Okay.
Exactly. And growing up, it was very difficult. Not just because I was queer, because I am queer, but also because somehow I felt different than, kids at school. Not that I felt better than anyone, but I felt like an outsider. And also, I wasn't really safe at home, so I didn't have a safe space outside of the house and in my house. So I would say that was the number one factor for why I left Brazil, for why I moved to Canada. And now I have spent more than half of my life in Canada. So I'm more Canadian than Brazilian now. If I look, the number of years that I've spent in both countries. But being Brazilian is part of my DNA, is part of who I am as well. And
do you feel safer in Canada?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I do. I feel safer for sure, generally speaking. Canada is way safer than Brazil. It's the polar opposite. But I also feel safer to express who I am. I do have a little bit of fear when I see politicians toying to the idea of having us as scapegoats. I am aware of the power of me as an artist and what I say and how I present myself. But I'm also aware that Canada is not a perfect society, and of course, because of now, we see more and more of hate on the internet in the US and also in Canada. I do fear that I'm not going to be feeling as safe as I once did, or as I am right now. I still feel safe in Canada, but I have been approached by white supremacists in Toronto. I have been called the F word many times in Toronto. And it used to get to me, it used to be hurtful, but now it doesn't. I just know that it has nothing to do with me personally, it's just with who is expressing the hate. It's their problem to deal with.
When you're touring around the world, when you're going to places like Europe and the Far East and in South America, and you're touring these places, how do you navigate those spaces when you are on tour and you're an artist and you're being yourself? How do you go about that?
Yeah.
Are you always like...
It depends on the country, I'm always like, I go on the internet and I look it up. And I'm always aware of how me being who I am can be seen differently from place to place,
And you can be potentially targeted because of that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Just for being
I'm
who you are.
I'm actually starting to just be who I am. And I'm starting to think about that because we're planning to tour the US. And that is one of the things on the list to do, on the to-do list, like, and make sure that we have like a system that we do feel secure. I do have to think about my safety and the safety of the musicians with me. So now we're going to Europe and we are aware that, we have to be pretty much in and out. So we go on stage, we come out, and then that's it. Unfortunately, we have to be that way just because, things right now are a little bit heated than it used to be politically everywhere. So we are aware of that, and we are working to make sure that we also stick together, as a group. We do things together. We go in together. We leave together.
No one goes out alone.
And exactly. Yeah. Which is horrible, but that is the price that we have to pay when people go, spewing hate towards like our community and people who look like me,
In your bio, you are you call yourself gender non-binary. You are part of the LGBT community. You call yourself queer. For yourself, how does queer represent yourself? What does being queer mean to you, and how it represents you?
Well, I think the first thing that comes to mind is it's my safe space. By calling myself queer, I'm reminding myself of the people who supported me the most, the people who supported me for who I am. I remember when I moved to Toronto in the first gay bar that I went to, and how I felt at home, or the first gay club that I went to and I felt at home.
Do you remember what club it was?
Yeah, so the first place was a bar called Zelda's in Toronto Church. And then the first club was the Barn.
The Barn. I love the Barn.
Yeah.
Which floor was your favorite?
The first floor.
Really?
Where they played they played hip hop.
Okay.
It was my favorite store. I just like the energy. But I like it all. Like I would go to the second and the third level. I would explore all three of them.
Yes, especially on that third floor.
Sometimes. Exactly.
They would have some dark rooms up there, people.
Yeah. For me, it was just finding who I was at the time. That's not necessarily who I am, because I know this. We can be queer, we can be non-binary, we can be androgynous, we can be anything we want to be. But at the end of the day, we are who we are. At the end of the day, we feel pain, we feel loneliness, we feel happiness, we feel everything that everyone else feels.
And did you
know what I mean?
Did you recognize this at a young age for yourself, that you were different?
Yes, I always knew from a very, very young age, I would say maybe like 6, 7, that I was non-binary. But I didn't have a name for it. I didn't know what non-binary was. Like the gender bending for me has been a thing from, I think, the day I was dancing from the TV when I was 1 year old, And I used to tell my cousins, the ones closest to me, that I was not a man or a woman, that I was not what people want me to be all the time, And deep down, I knew that was who I was, But I was in my journey, and I'm still, in this journey of finding who I am as a person in general. I don't think you ever know entirely who you are.
I wanna ask you this next question, just as an experiment to go with me on this, my second to last question for you. And for myself, for me personally, I consider myself androgynous, and I personally don't use the word gender non-binary for myself, because for me, I'm a combination of both male energy and female energy, and that those two separate things equal something more. And for yourself to say that you are non-binary, what does that mean for you? How would you define that? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, completely. I always ask that question, and it is very challenging for the people around you, like friends, family, to come to terms with calling you they, them, or calling you or identifying you as non-binary or as androgynous. And with me, it has to do with a political message that I'm sending, you know? But also, I do not have a problem with my closest friends calling me she or he or them. The problem that I have is with the male, especially straight, cisgender, calling me he or whatever they want to call me, you know? Like, I don't want to give the people who are the oppressors the power to call me who they want to call me.
How they want to identify you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I want to tell them that it's on me to tell them.
You will say how you are identified.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, and that thing about the female to male energy, I always thought about it. Like, you know, I grew up with 3 women in my house, like my mom and my 2 sisters. And I always had, I would say I always had the female energy that I tapped into way more than the male energy, you know? So it just, for me, it just made sense to be, to see myself as them, as the possibility of being more than only 2 things.
Exactly. I
don't know if that makes sense.
Perfect sense. Powerful words. Bruno Capinan, thank you so much for your time. Well said, well done, well made. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
For all things Bruno, check out the website, capinan.com. Plus in hour 2, I'll be featuring a 3-song Bruno Capinan set.
Sul-americano, sou filho de Oxalá. Viajei pra levantar meu império, minha voz. Sul-americano, preto gay ocidental. Da carne de carnaval, no meu sangue a dor dos meus. Sul-americano, do país do bacanal. De Zumbi a João, Marielle, Elza, Gil. Areia, oh, mareo. Areia, oh, mareo. Areia, oh, mareo. Areia, oh, mareo. Sul-americano, Tapajós, Tupinambá, Potim, Guaracaeté, Goitacás, Tupiniquim. Sul-americana do Brasil.
Hi, I'm Cameron Bailey, Artistic Director and Co-Head of TIFF, the Toronto International Film Festival. You're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
Up next, American queer indie artist Eric Terino. Eric Terino, hi, how are you?
Hi, I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. I have to say thank you for being here, Eric Terino, to have your voice, your story be heard by the LGBT community and beyond. So thank you for that, especially to talk about you, and you. But let's start here when it comes to all things you. Let's start here. 2022, Innovations of Grave Perversity. Am I saying this correctly? Innovations of Grave Perversity? That's correct. This is your current album, 2022's your latest record. This title, Innovations of Grave Perversity. Where does this title come from? Talk to me about this.
Yeah, it's a curious thing. I'm surprised that people aren't asking me about the meaning of it more often, because I think on the surface it does feel like, sort of vague, and that's intentional as well. It's supposed to be something that you can kind of lay your own meaning into, but so I don't like giving too much away about it. But I will say that it is rooted in this idea of change, and for a really long time I felt like I was in this place of I guess I would say hopelessness. I was in a dark place, and as I was making this record, I began to shift my perspective to have hope for the future and to be grounded in my baseline had become optimism as opposed to pessimism. And so from where I had, started out, this was a gravely perverse innovation, to have that new outlook. And so it basically it's a long-handed way of saying changes.
So talk to me about this record, and when it comes to the sound, the sonic landscape of Innovations of Grave Perversity, how would you describe the sound of this record?
I think it's a folky record. That's the term that I'm hearing most often when people listen to it, and it definitely has a folk element to it. I think primarily because it's almost orchestral as well. I think when you hear the term folk, generally you think acoustic guitars and that kind of stuff, and there are moments of that, but it's much more orchestral. There's a lot of strings and harps and flutes and woodwind instruments and that kind of thing. But my intention was to make it all purely organic and natural, because this is my third record, and for the two records that I'd done prior to this, they were mostly not electronic, but there was a digital element to basically all of the instrumentation. So I was again looking to innovate and to make these changes, and that was another big change, was not only working with live instruments but also working with other musicians, which is something I hadn't done before.
So what gave you the idea or the inspiration to work with live musicians and create this new sound, so to speak?
Well, I think a big part of it was just that desire for change and for connection, really. A lot of the record is about trying to come out of a place of isolation and reconnect with the world. And so that was a goal I had in mind when I was making it. And I am a person who deals with fairly severe agoraphobia. And so for years, I've been secluded in my home, literally in isolation, even prior to the pandemic. And that added a whole other layer to that situation. But in making this record, one of my goals was to use it as a tool to connect with the outside world in a way that I hadn't done in quite some time. So not only that, but I also just felt that as I was writing these songs, they naturally seemed to call for that sound. And they were sounds that I couldn't make myself, so it was sort of a win-win.
So when you were recording this new record, were you going to a studio, being surrounded by people?
No, see that, and also I recorded this at the end of, I think it was November of 2020 into April of 21. Mm-hmm. So it was in the sort of the height of the pandemic. Yeah. So I don't think I would have been able to do that even if I had wanted to. Mm-hmm. But it was all recorded on my end in my home, and remotely in the homes of all the other musicians who played on it. Mm-hmm. So we kind of worked sort of like we're doing now, remotely. And I would, give descriptions of what I wanted from a cellist or, a trumpet player, and they would send me their tracks and we'd go back and forth. But it was a way of connecting with people all over the world. Most of the musicians who play on this are not in my country.
So your record is available on digital. I get that.
It is, but it's also on vinyl, and cassette.
And on cassette. Talk to me about, I get vinyl, I get digital, but talk to me about why you chose to put this record out on cassette.
A cassette has always been a medium that I'm fond of, and I think in maybe the last 5 years or so, it's sort of had a revival, and artists are putting out their music on cassettes again. But and it's something that I actually do for my first 2 records as well. But with this project, I work with a Brooklyn-based indie label called Perpetual Doom, and they do vinyl releases as well. But they started out doing cassette releases, and I did the vinyl release of this on my own with my own label, but I worked with Perpetual Doom to do the cassette, and it's sort of it's a very intimate kind of sound, and it's an intimate record, so it made sense to have it on that format.
So 2013, Mountains of Nothing in Love. That's 2013. 2019,
yes.
Champagne and Childhood Hunger. 2022, Innovations of Grave Perversity. These are your 3 records. How did you get into music originally? How did this all come about for you?
I've always been a lover of, listening to music and sort of in a scholarly kind of way. I've always been really interested in studying the music that I like and the artists that I like. And for much of my adolescence, I was kind of, haphazardly making little songs and trying to build up some way of making records, but I really didn't know how to do it. And it took until 2013 for me to really decide that I had to just, put forth the effort myself and sort of cement these songs that I'd been playing with for such a long time. But I have no, sort of classical training or anything. I'm very much an independent, self-taught kind of person. And I think it begins with words, and my love of words and the ability that the power that they have really to communicate feelings. And so that was kind of where it began, which isn't to say that I wrote poetry necessarily, but I began really focusing on writing lyrics and then trying to figure out how to put that to music, which is interesting because with Mountains of Nothing in Love, that first record, it was definitely that way. It began with writing lyrics and then sort of fitting it into music. And then I come to 2022 as I'm writing Innovations of Grave Perversity, and it was the opposite. And I was writing the music and then sort of fitting in pieces, of words that I'd written along the way into that. So music has always been something that I'm passionate about, but in a way I consider myself an artist more than a musician. And I think that's because it's more about the whole, the bigger picture for me, rather than necessarily just the music. But of course the music is the foundation of it. But I'm really interested in all of the other elements that you can tap into when putting out a record, like doing the paintings for the artwork, or, like I said, I put this vinyl together myself, which meant I did all the different graphic design layouts, and I had to work with the pressing plant, and there's all sorts of different things that you can tap into, artistic mediums when you're putting out a record, which is really kind of ideal for me personally.
Yeah. So you are part of the LGBT community. I'm interested to know for yourself, you identify as what? A gay person, as someone who's queer? How do you see yourself?
I identify as a gay man.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always been important to me to reflect that in the work that I do. And it's amazing that it feels like finally, after all this time, people are starting to make music that openly discusses the things that we deal with in our world. But when I was growing up, it wasn't, there was almost nothing. And so I always had a strong desire to make sure that, if I'm writing a romantic song, that there are specific pronouns in there, and I'm not trying to make it, sort of amorphous and vague so that someone else could, possibly not know that it's a gay love song. But yeah, I feel a strong connection to the community, and it's been really wonderful to feel the love back from the community as I've been out, promoting this record and putting it out into the world. It feels like people are understanding that even though it's a universal idea coming, trying to move out of a place of darkness and into a place of light, it is my story, and as such, it is a queer story.
So for yourself, when you were growing up, when you were coming of age, when did you start recognizing that aspect of yourself, that you were attracted to men, that you had these feelings? When did you start becoming conscious of that?
It's hard to say, and actually something that I don't think about often. But I suppose,
like when you were growing up, did you have crushes on male friends at school when you were in middle school or high school, that sort of thing?
I didn't, and I think it was because I was physically attracted to men at that stage in my life, but I didn't have crushes on people other than girls at the time, because I think it was just so outside of the scope of possibility. I come from a very small town, and it wasn't something that had even crossed my mind. And when I really began to understand myself and those feelings, it was when I first met who became my first boyfriend, and both of us were not out, and we were in a place of sensing this really strong emotional connection to each other, and not really understanding it, but embracing it, because it felt like, regardless of the fact that we both were male, we had this feeling that felt suspiciously like love for one another. And so we sort of discovered it together, which was really a beautiful thing to have in my life, that I was able to go and we came out together, and I was able to go through all of that with someone who I really, really cared about.
How did you and this person meet?
It was, I think, on
a dating app or something?
Before Grindr, before Manhunt. I don't know if you go back this far. There was a website just simply called gay.com.
Okay.
And it was like an AOL kind of chat room thing. Mm-hmm. And we met on there, but we didn't, I don't remember speaking through that very much, but I know we texted for a long time. And it took a lot for us to feel comfortable enough to meet. And he went to college, 40 minutes or so away from where I had just started going to college. And I drove up to meet him one weekend, and we sort of immediately hit it off. But then, there were months and months and months of secrecy that followed that.
And you mentioned you guys essentially came out together. How was your coming out process? And I'm assuming you came out to your family. How was that?
Yeah, for me, it was really good, actually. My family was very loving and understanding. And
did they say that, well, we knew all along?
They didn't actually. I think with artists, it's like I mean, I've always been known as an artist, and so I think they sort of just felt like I was just, that was what was different about me. Not that it was anything to do with my sexuality, but they all came around quickly and were very accepting. My boyfriend, his family was sort of the opposite, and they were not. Well, it wasn't as bad as it could have been, but they were not welcoming to this idea, and they really resented me for it, which I'm sure you can understand why they would feel that way, but is absurd in reality. As if
did they think that you turned him gay?
Basically, or they felt like I was encouraging this and allowing this to happen.
You were a bad influence.
I basically, yes, I had made him gay. But they,
if only,
I know, right? But I know that they have come around. I'm not close with him anymore, but I, see things on social media, and I know that he's now married to someone else, and that his family went to the wedding. And from where I stand, it seems like it all worked out beautifully. But at the time, it was tough, and I very much wanted them to accept me, and I wanted, I thought I was like going to marry this guy. I wanted to blend our lives and our families, and the few times that I was in the presence of his parents and I tried to make conversation with them, they would completely pretend that they couldn't hear me and that I didn't exist. So it was a painful experience for me in that regard, but of course it was much more painful for him to have to deal with the fact that his parents felt as if there was something unworthy about him because of this. But overall, I mean, it was a very positive experience to come out. And even with my friends and his friends, they all were supportive, but it was still hard. It was still difficult to, some weren't surprised and some were. And I think actually both of us at the time had female best friends who had some sense that maybe our friendships were, friendships with the female friends were more than just platonic. And so I think it was upsetting to both of them to have to reconcile all of that as well.
The cover for this record, is that a painting?
It is a painting, yeah.
And is it a painting that you did?
It is, and there's also some other paintings. It's like if you have the physical vinyl, there's another big painting inside, and there's one in the back, and they are all sort of Van Gogh inspired, but
are they versions of you?
Well, only the cover. Inside there's a landscape, and on the back there's a very subtle painting of a tree. But yeah, the cover of this record, and it's actually the first time I've put a picture of myself on the cover of one of my records, and that was because I finally felt that, as I've been speaking about, a lot of my previous work was sort of doom laden and dark, and I thought that's who I was, but I guess subconsciously I couldn't commit to it. And with these songs, it was the first time I felt like, yeah, this is, I'm confident in placing my face to this and saying, this is who I am.
Wow. So talented.
Thank you.
I was wondering, I'm like, I wonder if he did this, or did he commission this, or is this even him? I don't know.
Yeah.
So that's how you see yourself?
In the story of the songs on Innovations of Great Perversity, yeah. And that portrait was supposed to be a depiction of someone coming out of the darkness and into the light and sort of forming, and looking forward with determination to improve things.
Eric Terino, I have to say thank you so much for your time. Well said, well done, well recorded, well painted.
Thank you, and thank you for having me and giving me the opportunity to speak about all of this stuff.
For all things Terino, check out ericterino.com. Plus in hour 2, I'll be featuring a 3-song Eric Terino set. And by the way, if you're listening on the edited podcast version and you'd like to hear the full 2-hour episode, simply head over to marktara.com and hit the archives banner.
And everyone is dethroned. Now we have no place to go, so let's all just go.
Phone rings. I got a message from the mayor. He's going to call me back the next day. I get the call, and he said, if you'd accept, we'd like to honor you with the key to the city. There was an event later that year in May. Just a key, right? Like, key to what? A decent job, a good singing career. It's really a metaphor, but it's history. So a reporter wants to talk to me and says, well, so it's a key, right? Like, what's the big deal? I said, well, not everybody gets the key. So I looked it up, and I guess it is kind of a big deal.
The date, May 17th, 2018, when trans activist Susan Gapka made history by becoming the first trans woman to be presented with the key to the city of Toronto. By the way, past recipients include Rush and the Raptors. And just like that, this little gay journey through Rainbow Country has come to an end. For the full 2-hour episode, head over to marktara.com, where everything is connected, and hit the archives banner. To keep up to date with the show, check out my socials at Mark Tara. The podcast is available on all major platforms, including audible.com and iHeartRadio. And finally, I want to take this time to thank you for taking your time to be with me. Remember, despite all the craziness going on in the world these days, know this. We are living in days of making dreams come true, so believe in yourself, and the world will believe in you.
Hi, this is Police Constable Danielle Botno, also known as LGBT Cop, and you're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.